Welcome to episode 9 of the In Between Classes podcast. I am your host, Will Gottlieb, joined as always by my friend Josh Schmidt. Josh, how's it going?
I actually saw that my old school in South Dakota had their last day with students yesterday. And here in Maine, we still have about 4 weeks, so I am getting adjusted to the schedule a little bit.
Yeah, that's so, I guess, foreign to me because I'm used to, you think once May 1st hits, students check out. So the idea of having to stick around school till mid-June just sounds ridiculous to me. But
It's definitely
so
different.
it's quite different, sounds like. So on this episode, we wanted to talk about something that we've talked about earlier. I think we touched on it last fall in one of our very first episodes, the idea of student choice. So this is something that, Josh, you've implemented in your classroom. It's something that I'm hoping to achieve over years. Maybe not this first year or something like that, but over years, that's something I think every teacher should at least give an attempt at implementing. And so I guess when we say student choice, Josh, what is student choice? What does it look like in your classroom?
So there's really two terms that we're going to use today and talk about quite a bit. And the first one is authentic choices. So the idea that when you're giving kids a decision in the classroom, it's a real decision. It's not something that's minuscule like, do you want to take notes on paper or do you want to take notes, off like a basic worksheet or something like that? Like those are very similar choices. You want to be giving them real, authentic choices about how they learn content. The other one that we're going to use and start with is called optional differentiation, which is more the idea that choice is designed to help you differentiate your content for students, but in many ways the choice is an option from the student's perspective on something that is outside the traditional structure. So Will, do you want to go into a little bit more detail on optional differentiation and get us started with our first topic?
Yeah, so I guess when I hear the phrase differentiation, this is something that we were just hammered home with in college. Year after year, every different education class. It was all about how can you differentiate your classroom to each individual student. How can you allow every student to learn to the best of their abilities? And I've always, kind of wrestled with it. It sounds crazy difficult, the idea of, okay, you have 20 plus kids in a classroom. You have to figure out how all 20 of them learn best and now pick out, okay, now you kids are going to learn this way, you students are going to learn this way, and so on and so forth. So that's where I think student choice is just kind of like the perfect catch-all. You throw together some options that achieve the learning goal that you want, and then you let the kids decide what works best for them. So that's why I've used the phrase optional differentiation. You can tell the kids, hey, you can learn this one way, that might work best for me as a teacher, might work best for 90% of the kids in the class, but there are options out here if you think you learn a different way. And basically, as a teacher, I'm allowing you to identify what way you learn best. Is that kind of how you've experienced it in your classroom?
Yeah, and I think one of the things that you're hitting on is the idea that usually within like optional differentiation, choices are designed as something that is outside that traditional norm. So when you, the teacher, are creating content, when you're thinking about choice, some teachers will start with, okay, so I am going to present the content in this one specific way. For example, in a math classroom, it'd frequently be a lecture-based environment is very common. Then the optional differentiation would be, if you want to, there is this optional video that you can watch instead, and then you can take notes on the video. And that option that you're giving the kids is very authentic. Like learning from the whole class instruction versus the video is very different and authentic. However, the thing that's hard for a lot of teachers when they're starting is that you are relying on the kid to make their own decision. They can make the wrong decision, which is different than if you are just differentiating and you are designing content and putting the kids in the situation that they'll learn best. Many of my students will pick an option that I know is not the best choice for them. And you have to decide as a teacher, is the lesson that they're about to learn difficultly? Is that the right lesson for them to be learning at this point? Kids who are like, I'm just going to do 6 IXLs this week. And I will tell them, I don't think that's a good choice for you. I really don't. I feel like you should mix it up. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of IXL. And they'll be like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to do IXL. And you kind of have to sit there and decide, are you willing to let that kid learn that hard lesson?
It almost sounds a little, I don't know if scary is the term to use, but I mean, as a teacher, I would almost bet, nearly every person that's ever gone to education, part of it is because they like having control of their environment. And in doing
absolutely.
this, you're giving up complete and total control. I guess, I mean, you obviously present the options, so you have control over what they can and can't do. But it's the idea of, okay, now I can't control my environment completely. I have to give some of this up to the students, which is honestly, obviously a huge responsibility that you're laying on the students. Does that ever concern you? The idea that, okay, now instead of me being responsible for their learning, they are now responsible for the learning.
Oh, that is so hard. And it's something that you have to hammer home every day. Because you got to remember, basically every good teacher does differentiation on a consistent basis. Like, that's just fact. The thing that's different about student choice is you allow for poor choices. And you have to give your kids that responsibility, or else it's not really an authentic choice. Now, I will give my kids recommendation. Now, my kids have gotten very good about bringing up their computer and saying, what is your recommended pathway for section V3? And I'll be like, okay, that's a good question, and I will help you make some decisions there. But ultimately, it is their responsibility. And every time that I kind of help them, like without forcing them to take that first step, I am undercutting my own message. And one other thing I wanted to put here, and I wanted to kind of get your feed on this, students are always going to look for the easy route first. They are. Students are always going to try to figure out the trick or the shortcut. And I think that's age-appropriate behavior, and that we should reward kids for trying to find those shortcuts, but we need to make sure that we de-incentivize them as well. What do you think about that?
It obviously sounds very conflicting. Like when you say reward kids for doing age-appropriate behavior, reward kids for trying to find the easiest route, what do you mean by that? Just by saying like, you're doing the smart thing and trying to do less work. I'm not going to allow you to do that, though.
Yeah, it's making sure, so when you're, like, if a kid goes through and reads the directions exactly, and the directions do not say, I want you to, check your answer, something like that. If a kid doesn't do that, what I will do is I will make them go back and check their answer, but I'm going to give them a reward and say, hey, that's a good catch on there, like, well done. We're in this together, and you caught my mistake. And that does two things. It sends the message to the kid that there should be trying to find the shortcuts within your structure, because in the same way in life, if there is a good, consistent shortcut through a process, you should do that. But you need to make sure you emphasize to that kid, hey, the goal here is to actually master the content. So the fact that you're taking the shortcut, good look, I appreciate the help, but now you're going to go do it right because we want you to actually master the skill.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. It comes down to the idea of work smarter, not harder. And
exactly.
If they are working smarter and doing the least amount of work, kudos to you. You're doing something that everybody in life does. However, at the end of the day, you still have to learn this material. So I'm going to make it a little bit more tough for you. So here's what you're actually going to do.
Yeah, and I think that's okay. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Now I completely agree with that. So then we really wanted to touch on, so that was from a teacher's perspective, the idea of, as a teacher, I am setting up a classroom where the students can differentiate as they find need. Then you mentioned the idea of authentic choice. And when you say this, what immediately goes to my mind is the idea, okay, you can give a student an option between two different worksheets, literally the exact same thing, just different coefficients to the variables or something like that. And when you say authentic choice, I don't view that's obviously not really a choice. Like that's just saying, okay, here's a worksheet you have to do. You can either do worksheet A or worksheet B, even though they're the same thing.
Yeah, my first year, I actually did that. I created textbook assignment A and textbook assignment B, and I had always been told, do you want to give kids choices? And I was like, oh, pat on the back of myself, good job, and then what they did is they would just scan the story problems to see which one had less story problems, and they would do that. And I was like, all right, so that's not working. Like other non-authentic choices is like a textbook assignment or a worksheet. Like, yeah, they're different, but they're not an authentic choice. In my classroom, we have IXL and like Brain Genie are both effective resources that I can use, but they're not authentic choices because what they are is a computer-based and adaptive assessment. That's what it is. And so if you're choosing a Brain Genie versus an IXL, that's not really the decision that you're making. Now, there is a way to fix that, and we'll talk about it in our third topic. But right now, when we're talking about authentic choices, now we got to get into something that is truly different and talks about learning style. So, like the example we talked about, like the class lecture versus the video. Now we have something that's different. We have the worksheet that you can do in class, or maybe the game on Manga High. Now we're talking about something that's different. Maybe like doing a miniature project, like one of ours for transformations. Kids have to create a level on one of the games that we play in there, or you can take a traditional test. That's fine too. Like those are some really good, authentic choices that are really beneficial to kids. So what are some other authentic choices that you've had?
Well, here's kind of what I've been running into that I'm sitting here debating, trying to decide whether an idea is a true authentic choice. Like I said, you can give a student a worksheet or a homework assignment out of a textbook where it's basically you probably have 7, 8, 9, 10 exercises, fill out these exercises on a piece of paper and all grade it and see what they look like. And how that compares to an IXL or a Brain Genie, I guess, what was the phrase you used? A computer
adaptive system.
Adaptive,
yeah, basically,
yeah.
So the assignment changes as you go through it.
Right. I guess how do you determine that those are two different things? Because in theory, they're doing the exact same thing. They're doing the exact same. I mean, if you were, trying to, work on the distributive property, I can do 10, 15 distributive property examples on a worksheet or 10 to 15 distributed property examples on IXL and Brain Genie. I guess what is the point where you say, yes, these are two very different choices?
Yeah, and I think you're honestly asking the right questions. And if you're, as a teacher, able to ask that question, then you are exactly where you need to be in choice. Because Will's absolutely right. That's a very, very hard thing to decide in your classroom. I frequently decide that those two are authentic choices for one major reason. A computer adaptive program, like an IXL, requires that you get it correct before you're able to move on. Like you have to get a certain percentage of problems correct before you are allowed to be done with that assignment. A textbook assignment in my classroom, you can hand it in incomplete, but then you're going to have to do corrections. So eventually, you have to get every problem correct in order to move on. However, the authentic choice for the kid comes down to, would I rather do less problems that are short, more problems that are short, or less problems that I have to get right eventually? And that's the difference. So your students who would rather get a problem wrong and do something totally new are likely to pick that computer adaptive program, IXL, Brain Genie, something like that. A student who works a little bit slower is far more likely to take, a textbook assignment or a PDF because they know that they have 14 problems to do. Like, that's the number in order for their homework assignment to be done. So, but that's a hard choice. Like, what do you think? Do you agree, disagree? What are your thoughts?
No, I really like that, I guess. And that's obviously why I like having this conversation, because I never even thought about it that way. In my mind, I saw it as, okay, you're doing exercise. Doesn't matter if I'm doing it on the computer, if I'm doing it on a piece of paper. In my mind, exercises were exercise. But that idea of, the adaptive computerized version where, a student actually sees you failed, you got this wrong, do it again, got it wrong, do it again, got it wrong, do it again, and constantly being able to hit, quick exercise after exercise, that is, I guess, completely different than, doing a worksheet, you as the teacher grading and them getting it back and having to actually learn from their mistakes. Think about it that way, then yes, those are, two true different assignments there. So like I said, those are just thoughts I was thinking of, just because how can you actually define when two assignments are different. But I really like that. What about, so that's, authentic choice in regards to proving you mastered an assignment. What about authentic choice and actually how you learn the material? I mean, how do you decide that a lecture is much different than, watching a video? I can think of some ideas on how they're different, but what are your thoughts?
So I think with a lecture versus a video, the biggest difference is a video is something that you can do at your own speed. Now, in my classroom, the choice happens because of time frame as well as, location. So when you walk into my classroom, it's not there's a lecture going on at the board and then you're doing a video. It's the choice board says that the lecture component is happening next Tuesday as a whole group. Or I could watch the video now on Monday and then be ahead of pace. So that is where the choice gets a little bit different in mine. However, the thing that I like about videos is anyone who has stood in front of a classroom and done a lecture to a middle school or high school age classroom knows that you are not reaching every kid every day, even if it is the greatest lecture in the history of mankind. It's hard for kids to maintain attention, and it's really hard for kids nowadays to maintain attention. Whereas a video, you can embed questions into something like Edpuzzle that force attention the way that a lecture can't. Now, that doesn't mean that you can watch every kid, but in my class, there are 4 questions in every video. You have to get 3 of them right, or you have to rewatch another similar video, so what I call the retake video. And for the kids, that is the authentic choice, is that you could wait for me to do the whole group instruction, or you can do the video. And I will tell you, 90% or more are choosing the video because for the kids, the schedule and the time frame are the most important decision to them.
Right, yeah, and just my thought is it would almost be, I don't want diss anybody that enjoys a lecture-based environment, but it'd almost be foolish to not do the video because the way I look at video is, I can pause and actually think about the material before the teacher keeps talking. I can rewind something if I didn't understand it, as opposed to a full lecture-based environment. I mean, as I can think back to myself as a middle schooler or a high schooler, I wasn't dare going to raise my hand and ask the teacher to repeat something or say, hey, can you explain that in a little more depth? Because you don't want the rest of the class thinking, oh my God, he doesn't know what the teacher's saying,
and
even though I doesn't understand it.
Well, and
so
one
that's
story
just what
I just had a quick story, Will. Like, one of my favorite stories about this is when I was working with a coworker of mine, he was trying to convince his teachers to do more videos. So he recorded a teacher doing a 40-minute lecture in class with one of her strongest classes. Then he took the video after class and cut out all of the wait time and cut out all of the behavior management and cut out, waiting for kids to go up to the board and answer their question. He cut out all of that and he cut it down into a 10-minute video, and he included every single question she asked the class as a separate video inside of Edpuzzle. And that for me is always a big thing too, that the efficiency that comes with a video is a lot higher than a lecture-based environment. Now, some people are better at lecture than I am and can compensate for that difference, but you can pack in so much information into a video that is very hard to do in a whole class lecture.
Right, yeah, that comes down to, at the end of the day, the student will most likely choose the video, but inevitably choose whatever they find best. Because some kids might learn better from having the actual teach. Some kids are just more outgoing and not afraid to ask the teacher a question if they're explaining. And I guess that's the advantage of a lecture-based environment. You physically have the person in front of you to answer questions, even though odds are with the entire class they might be too scared to ask those questions. But anyway, so that was our thoughts on authentic choice. I guess we wanted to dive into just the last idea, and this was kind of that third component of your classroom when you talked about pacing, choice. This third one is leveling, which in essence is embedded in the student choice, because obviously you can't have leveling within a one-size-fits-all classroom where you're learning the same way, you are doing the same assignments. So that's where this leveling kind of comes into play. So Just quickly, if you want to explain what is leveling in your classroom, how does it relate to student choice?
So when students are working through what we call a choice board, they have 4 levels of topics on the choice board. Levels 1, 2, 3, and 4, where 3 is the goal for every kid to hit on every standard. We don't reach that, but that's our goal. So when kids are making decisions in my class, they can't pick a level 4 option right away unless they've proven that they're ready for it. You usually pick a level 1, then you might pick another level 1, or you might jump to a level 2, and after that level 2, then you might jump to a level 3. And the goal is to teach kids about the progress of learning, that you start small, and then you're working up to more detailed content. Then, as they get through that choice board, the level 3 and level 4 options are usually inherently more interesting. So that's the mini projects, and that's the games, and that's the stuff on Prodigy, and those types of activities are usually higher up on the choice board. You also get to do some really cool stuff in leveling that all of a sudden now, maybe you're doing that whole group instruction at level 1, but then you got a level 4 video for that really complicated topic that you always want to talk about. In mean, median, mode, and range, I developed 2 separate videos. One of those videos is just calculating mean, median, mode, and range. And then one video is entitled, Are Girls Better Than Boys at Basketball? Where I dive into like some data collection we did to prove how you can manipulate statistics to make an argument. And that can only happen if leveling exists. So what do you think about that, Will? Like, how hard do you think that is to implement?
Well, when I'm looking through this, when I'm listening to what you're saying here, it almost sounds like, and maybe I'm just obviously a rookie teacher, I just don't know what am I talking about here? The content mapping that goes into different class sizes. This feels like something that can almost only exist in a middle school classroom. And I say that because, a high school classroom, I'm looking at the stuff that I have to teach next year. I have, split up into 10, 12 chapters, 5, 6 topics per chapter. I'm looking at around 60 to 70 different topics that I have to, again, I hate to say cover, but 60 to 70 different topics that I have to get to as a high school, algebra 1 or geometry teacher. So telling the kids, okay, you have to do 1 to 2, 3 different levels of an assignment for each of those, it's almost unreasonable to ask so much work. I mean, it does seem almost unreasonable. Whereas at middle school level, I feel like things are paced a little bit slower, where you are spending more time on individual topics and you can dive into these different levels. And am I completely off base thinking that, or what do you think about that?
No, I don't think it's a reasonable thing to think. I do think there's 2 parts that you're kind of missing in that equation. Until you're in your own classroom, you're not necessarily going to be aware on some of those decisions that you have control over that it doesn't feel like you do when you're just looking at standards. Number 1 is when you are creating a set of standards, those are goals that you're trying to hit every year. And if you simply target like a college rubric, I'm going to do this and then this and then this and then this, you're ignoring the fact that every group of kids you have every year is slightly different. And my personal philosophy is I would rather make sure kids know what they know rather than have seen everything at each individual grade level. That also means, though, that many of my kids go above grade level in a way that they might not otherwise because they're able to work at their own speed a little bit. The other thing that you're missing, too, is when you're developing those skills, like you're looking at standards, it's actually not drastically different for high school and middle school, and each substandard is usually covered multiple places. So if we're covering on my choice board mean, median, mode, and range for this many days, that is the same number of days that I would have covered it in a one-size-fits-all classroom. So like my minimum classroom speed is what my whole group instruction speed would be. And you can create like choice boards that take the same amount of time that they would otherwise. But you have to have a system in place to make sure there are appropriate consequences for going above or below that minimum speed.
So you're saying, like I said, I'm kind of looking at what I'm going to be teaching next year, and I know just one chapter is solving systems of linear equations,
Yep.
where as I think 6 or 7 topics, what they breaking it down, solving it by elimination, solving it by substitution, solving it by graphing, things of that nature. You're saying, okay, instead of, if it would take me 15 days to, cover this material, now instead of saying, okay, I'm breaking it down into these 7 topics that I'm going to cover over 15 days, just say, here's 15 days, and just have as much material on solving systems linear equations that you can, and just see what they can learn of that material in those 15 days.
Or you can think of it in the perspective of what I do. So sticking with systems of equations, I change that into 5 sections with approximately 3 days each. So then all of a sudden you have the idea of, okay, so like when I'm covering systems of equations, first day I would do, a lecture on, understanding the intersection as the solution. Well, on ours, we're going to do a Desmos activity that covers that. Okay, so then day 2, we're going to have a video on the graphing method, whereas in a whole group setting, maybe you're doing that textbook assignment. But you can choose that amount of time and then kind of develop the content within that time frame. And even then, you're still able to give your kids some choices. Like, obviously, I'm talking 10 years down the road, you can start to get really flexible with some of these ideas. But none of this happens overnight. You got to develop that quality content. And if you can give your kids one real, authentic choice a week, that's infinitely better than giving them 0. And then the next year you add one more real authentic choice a week. And eventually, 10 years down the road, you're going to be doing way more than I'm doing. So these things take a lot of time, and you need to use those coworkers, and like hopefully people just straight up use my content. Like, take my stuff, choose what you think is best, and then develop it for yourself.
Right. That makes sense. So I kind of get what you're saying there. It's in essence, again, I just hate getting hung up on something, but in essence, it's not, okay, I have to teach these 6 topics. It's here's X amount of days I have for this topic, for this chapter, throw as many choices and leveling in there, and then hopefully the kids are staying on track. And like I said, if some kids are falling behind pace, then you push those a little bit more than you have to the others.
Yeah, and then let those kids that are ahead of the game, let them pull ahead, right? And then when they need to slow down, you can pull them back too. Like, choice is not always for the kids like coming up from struggle. We also got to remember that there are so many kids that do incredibly well in our classrooms that aren't given the opportunity to work ahead. Like, just a little bit of flexibility for them is going to build some big relationships with those kids.
Right. That makes sense. So, yeah, that's pretty much everything we wanted to talk about on this topic, and it's mostly because we're both super excited for our closing bell topic. So we're going to move away from that student choice that we've been talking about here and move into our closing bell. And this was something Josh and I talked about. We still want to keep this podcast, nearly entirely. But again, we love sports, so we wanted to bring it back to a sports topic for our closing bell. And this is something Josh is really interested in, something that I've, been digging into myself. And it's the idea of, we love crossing analytics and sports. We see it start with baseball, with Moneyball and Bill James and everything that happened with Billy Beane and the Oakland A's. And now it made its way to basketball and, started with the Warriors jacking up 43s a game a few years ago. And now the Houston Rockets with Daryl Morey and everything that they do. I mean, it's so analytically and mathematically driven, sports in general, pro sports. We were wondering, can this same approach be brought down to a high school level? Now, let's say I coach a high school basketball team. Can I get them shooting 33s a game, which would be comparable to shooting 45 threes a game in the NBA? Is that a reasonable strategy? And that's something we wanted to talk about. And I guess, Josh, right off the top, why is this something you're as interested in as I am?
So I coach more middle school sports than I do high school sports. So, and a lot of times I'm looking at creating helping kids create skills so that they can be successful at a higher level. But when I'm, watching my students play games, I watch like a boys' middle school game, and they're warming up, and they're literally shooting every single shot as a 3 before the game. Like, you could watch, and I tell my girls that I coach this year, I said, okay, so we're going to watch the boys. I want you to count the number of 2-point shots that aren't layups that happen over the next 20 minutes. And the kids would watch it, and they was literally like 4. And that happens because they're watching the NBA game, and their favorite players, are Curry, and he's firing up threes like crazy. And for him, the efficiency is really important. Like, it is drastically a better strategy to be shooting all of those threes. However, at a middle school level, it's actually not a good strategy because they're not shooting correctly. Now, high school is the area where you could probably make an argument, but, Will, my thought is, wouldn't you have to do enough research with your own players to decide that it's actually more efficient to shoot a 3? Because you're thinking about expected value. That's why 3-point shots are more valuable. But in order for that to be true, you have to be shooting a certain percentage of 3-point shots to be worthwhile. So wouldn't you have to, as a coach, actually do that math?
Right, and that was actually something that it was actually last fall. The last math class that I had in college was combinatorics, and our end of the year project was they were just like, find some mathematics journal that you like and just give us a presentation on it. Well, I found it was some from the MIT Sloan conference, and it was the idea of when is the correct time to start fouling. And I was like, wow. I think I might have sent that to you. Mm-hmm. And I actually emailed the professor that researched this. And, I flat out asked him, like, hey, I want to be a high school sports coach. Is this something like this applicable to high school sports, not just his entire research was on the NBA? And he's like, it is, but you need to provide me with a wealth of statistics on your high school players. So it's exactly what you're saying there. You can apply the same strategy, but you need to know so much information about your players that is almost impossible to do when compared to the NBA. Because in the NBA, you have 15 years worth of LeBron James statistics. You have, 10 years worth of what Steph Curry's been shooting from 3. In high school, you get 4 years of that player, and that kid might not develop shooting threes until his junior year anyway. So you might only have a true season of his statistics to compute analytically and throw into that strategy. So that's where I would find it near impossible to apply this strategy to high schoolers. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I also think and I love the NBA. The thing about the NBA that's different, though, is the number of possessions and the pace that they play. I think pace is the thing that is most applicable from the NBA game down, because the idea is that if you are the better basketball team, you should want to maximize the number of possessions on the court. And that's something I even talk about, like, with my middle school kids. Like, we need more possessions, okay? So we need more turnovers. We need more quick shots. We need more layups. We need to, get steals. And what that happens is it creates the environment where, as the possessions increase, those expected values and percentages are going to get closer to that expected value. And so I think in high school, if you're going to really go for analytics, I think step 1 is you need to get a higher number of possessions. What do you think?
I completely agree. And that's why I guess you definitely hear it in football a lot. If you are the lesser team, you want to muck up the game, they say.
Exactly. Yep.
You love bad weather because it's slow. It'll slow you down, but you're the worst team anyway. It doesn't matter if you're getting slowed down. You want to slow down the other team. And this was something I seen. My fiance's dad has coached high school basketball for 20 years. In the last 2 years, I went and watched. He was in the, I guess the Sodak 16, they call it, basically the last game to get to the state tournament. And they went into this as the 16 seed in South Dakota, and that's basically saying they were the lowest seeded team that still had a chance to make the state tournament. So they were in the running, but they were the least likely team to make it because they were seeded up. They were playing the best team in the state. And his strategy consistently over these last 2 years that I've seen, when they were playing the best team in the state, slow the game down, use up all 35 seconds on the shot clock, and then get a shot up at the very end. So it is exactly what you're talking about. If you're the better team, you want more possessions. If you're the lesser team, you want to slow the game down, because that will pull down their, exactly what you said, expected values per possessions. So yes, in some way, just the very basic, pillars of what high school sports have been built on for years do come back to this very idea of analytics of, if you're the better team, you want more possessions. If you're the lesser team, you want to muck it up and have less possessions. So yes, in some ways it is very applicable to high school sports. But now the idea is, okay, and again, we're focusing mostly on basketball here, where does shooting 33s in a high school, shooting a 3 per minute, is that even reasonable in a high school game?
Well, and the other question too is this actually good for the development of players? So, I think about like middle school or lower high school. Like, maybe it might be the right strategy to win more games, but is it actually going to be the right strategy to develop a long-term program? Like, are those necessarily the same thing?
Right, yeah, and I've been I guess you would say, lower level coach. I've coached C team the last 3 years, and I've flat out told my players over and over again, we as coaches don't care if we win at the C team level. Yes, we want to win. That's the goal of every game. But at the C team level, we just care about seeing your guys' progression as players. And the varsity and JV coach, they echoed that to their players over and over again. We don't care if you win at this level. You just need to be getting better. And yes, so at what point does the development of the player come in conflict with the success of the team? And that one thing that you mentioned, the idea of just seeing middle schoolers go jack up threes left and right, that's something they do because in summer ball, traveling ball, AAU teams, whatever it is, they are with a coach who doesn't care about their development. He cares about winning that tournament, because I think we talked about this before. In some essence, the middle school traveling ball might be the last time that kid ever plays competitive basketball. So the coach only cares about winning at that point. So I guess, that was something I never really thought of. Where does the strategy that you implement, when does that conflict with the development of the player?
Well, and the conflict in my mind is, and I've seen this at some levels, where if you have a varsity program that has a unique strategy, you need time to develop that strategy. So you can't start teaching it to them when they get to varsity. There has to be some level where they're playing that way before. So you would reasonably have to have, your lower high school or upper middle school teams would have to develop that unique strategy as well. But I feel like in my mind, there are smaller, like the 3-point shot is always the hot button topic, but I feel like there are different pieces of the analytics conversation that you can, use as well without jacking up threes like crazy. Like the biggest one is free throws are the best shot in basketball as well. Like efficiency is layups, free throws, 3-point shots. And I think that people kind of miss the first two once in a while. And then you add more pace and you try to get those high efficiency shots. You don't necessarily need to shoot 33s.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess that is, again, and you just kind of nailed it down. Like I said, when I think analytics ball, I just think shooting a bunch of threes. But you are right. The one part, and I just overstepped it myself, layups and free throws are the biggest part of basketball. And that's where, people hate watching James Harden, but that's literally his game. Layups, free throws, and it's so at the end of the day, he is the most efficient player in the league, I guess, in terms of
probably ever, honestly. Like, I don't know who
exactly,
would be more efficient ever.
Exactly, but it comes down to people hate watching him play because that's not entertaining, that's not fun basketball. But I don't know, I feel like, and I have tons of more thoughts on high school basketball strategy and things of that nature. I feel like we could go on forever and ever with this, but
maybe we should make it a podcast sometime.
Yeah, maybe we should. maybe we store this for another closing bell, or we just decide to have an entire episode on. I don't know. Tons of thoughts on it, but I figured, so we aren't sitting here for another half hour talking about this, let's try and wrap it up right there. So with that in mind, thanks for joining us on episode 9 of the In Between Classes podcast. Josh, do we have an idea for our final topic, our final episode of the season?
Well, we've talked a lot this season about topics that we're very comfortable with. I thought for the final episode, I would love to talk about one that I personally struggle with, which is maintaining a healthy teaching life balance.
Right, and your idea with that is, should I be at the school from 7 in the morning till 7 at night? Should I be spending Saturdays and Sundays grading homework, things of that nature? And yes, this is something I'm very interested in as somebody I've already started doing this myself. I've already probably spent more time this summer prepping for next fall than most first-year teachers would. So I'm on pace to be just as bad at it as you are. So I think it's a healthy conversation for us to have. So with that in mind, if you're interested in that, join us in a couple of weeks when we're back for the final episode of the season.